Hello, this is week 2 of Ethics and Moral Problems at Northampton Community College. This lecture will be on ethical theory, Plato and Aristotle. Now, ethical theory, at least in the way that we are studying it here, and we said this in the last lecture, we are concerned with what we ought to think and what we ought to do. We can identify an ethic that works all the time and everywhere. That's what we're after. And too often people think very little about how they think. Does it sound odd? But then their actions really aren't based on sound thinking. They're really just reactions, and they're just guided by, say, impulse and emotion. Remember, we want to be free human persons, and that means we want to be intentional individuals. In other words, I'm moving through life with an intention as to how I want to progress towards fulfillment and happiness. And as we move through this course, and you begin to apply some developed principles or ethical understandings to yourself and others, try not to fall into the trap of just doing it. Always ask yourself, what ethic am I employing? Right? So to begin with, we're going to look at 2 ancient Greek philosophers today, Plato and Aristotle. As an aside, let me say something. I know that the readings might be difficult for some of you, and the type of reading is new and the material is new. So I'm just asking you, do you do your best? At least make certain that you grasp the content in the introduction to each thinker. You still should read the primary writings, as they, in this particular instance, Plato's Republic and such. It's going to help you see how they form their arguments and their thoughts. And to be honest, this is sometimes people's only opportunity to actually read directly from some of the greatest writings that humanity has ever produced. I mean, we're reading something that, was written 3 centuries BC. It's very cool for you to actually have say, or be able to say, I read Plato. I've read Aristotle. Yes, I read Immanuel Kant. So keep that in mind as you move through here. Anyway, let's talk about Plato. He was a pupil of Socrates. In fact, Socrates never really wrote anything down. So what we know of Socrates is through the written accounts of his student Plato. And Plato is sometimes referred to as the father of Western philosophy. For Plato specifically, though, only philosophy could provide genuine understanding, right? Because what it did is that it tackled questions and assumptions that all the other disciplines have left unquestioned. So, you will have the opportunity to read from the Republic, Book 2, and from the dialogue called Euthyphro. There are important questions and discoveries embedded in those works. I just want to briefly mention those. First of all, in the Republic, the selection, Socrates is having a dialect with Glaucon concerning what justice is. Think about this. We use terms all the time in our daily lives. We really question ourselves as to what these terms mean. In other words, you and I are both human beings. Great. If I asked you, so tell me, what is a human being? There'd be silence. If I were to ask you, do you want to be happy? I'm sure you would reply, yes. Well, I can then ask you, well, what is happiness? Probably more silence. If I asked you, what is love? Can you tell me what is goodness? What is beauty? What is hope? And so on, right? So in the Republic, Glaucon thinks he knows what justice is. That is until Socrates asks him for the meaning. And then he begins to demonstrate in dialogue fashion that makes Glaucon realize he doesn't really have the term understood quite correctly. Now, in the beginning of Book 2, it's really a chapter in our modern ears, right? He begins the story of the Ring of Gyges. Now, I'm not going to lay it all out now for you. It really is a wonderful story, and I am telling you that is one thing you will remember 10, 15 years from now. Almost every student I have had said this was the one thing that stuck with them. I want you to read it for yourself. When you're done reading it, begin to ask yourself, what would I do, if I had that ring? Or better put, why is anybody really just? If you see any connection between this and Tolkien's stories, you get where he got his ideas from, right? Anyway, the other thing that you're going to read is the Euthyphro. Now, let me just summarize what's known as the Euthyphro dilemma. Here's the question that they try to put together. Do the gods will something because it is good? Or is it good because the gods will it? I'll say that again. Do the gods will something because it is good? Or is it good because the gods will it? Now, if that sounds funny and odd, it's an important question. In other words, is there a nature in a thing or an action, like the human person, giving money to the poor, that is good in itself, and we discover it? Or is it only good because we choose to call it good, and because we're calling it good, therefore we do it? So it's not as odd as you think. It's a pretty important question in ethics. That's something for you to think about. Okay, moving on. Aristotle, he then was a pupil of Plato. So there are connections between these great thinkers. But there's also difficulties too. If you look at the detail of this painting, this actually is a detail of a painting entitled The School of Athens. You'll see Plato, he's the old guy on the left pointing up, and Aristotle, the dude on the right, pointing down. Plato's concerned with the meaning behind everything. And through that, there were these perfections of everything in our world that existed in the heavenly realm of forms. Chairs, people, butterflies, etc. They all existed up there in those forms as the perfect chair, perfect people, perfect butterflies, right? And somehow that we were remembering those things down here now. So if you remember the allegory of the cave, right, the real things, the real forms, the real chair, people, butterflies, they were outside. And we only have access to those here as some shadowy representation. So there's more to that allegory than so far you've been presented to. Notice, by contrast, though, Aristotle wanted to know about the concrete people and animals and plants. So he relied on observation, right? And you can see him pointing to the ground, sort of like patting down, like, hey, it's all down here, Plato. In other words, relying on observation and the senses to know, it's epistemology. But he didn't use experiments, kind of like the modern-day empirical scientist. Rather, what he used was reason arguments in the form of what we call a syllogism to come to a conclusion. So what I want to do is I want to just briefly introduce you to syllogisms, since we're not going to cover logic in this course. This is a famous one. It's been referred to many times. And again, I'm not going into syllogistic logic. But let me do say this. You really should study it if you have the opportunity, because two things are going to happen if you study logic. One, you'll understand you will understand most things much clearer. You're not going to fall prey to fallacies. That helps you be a more free person. And two, you're no longer going to watch or listen to the news, because you're going to soon learn that it barely passes for entertainment. And all you're going to be doing is pointing out all the fallacies and the erroneous chains of thought in their thinking. Anyway, here it is. Socrates is a human. All humans die. Therefore, Socrates will die. Now that is an argument, okay? An argument, philosophically, is not quarreling or bickering. An argument is the combination of two or more premises, right? And they result, then, in a reasoned conclusion. Now, here's what's necessary about this, or here's what's at least useful, I think, for you. If you accept those two premises, that Socrates is a human and all humans die, then you have to accept the conclusion that Socrates will die is necessarily true. You can't simply not like the conclusion. So when people build arguments and present us with arguments, if we accept their premises and the premises are true, then we have to accept the conclusion. We can't just simply say we don't like it because it goes against what we may believe or think or such, right? Unfortunately, most people do not follow the structure of an argument, reaching a valid conclusion, right? What you find today, mostly, especially in the news, that the veracity of an argument is typically determined by the level of outrage. So if somebody's angry and yelling, or they're on a subject that's out of bounds, we can't talk about it, they appear to win, right? So if you really want to do that, you can get mad, and though you might not be correct, people are going to act as you are, right? Of course, it terminates any dialogue. My point is, this isn't us. And does that sound like a lot of things that go on in our culture, and particularly what we hear in the news? Okay. Now, concerning ethics, you'll read from the Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle was more concerned with being a good person rather than identifying what is the right thing to do or to develop principles to follow. His ethics is understood as virtue ethics, and it's aimed at something that's known as eudaimonia. Now, eudaimonia is typically translated as happiness. Again, it's not subjective contentment. This makes me happy or that makes you happy. It's something it's often translated, and you might be better to understand it as blessedness, in that it's something that is truly good for the human person. So this ethic is always pointing towards a goal. That's known as teleology. Here's an example to help. We can call a knife virtuous if it does what it's designed to do. In other words, does the knife cut well? If the knife cuts well and it fits in your hand well, then it's designed to do what it's able to do what it's designed to do. Therefore, we would say that there's a virtue to it. All right. Let me say something about this. And you will read, he also talks about virtue being this sort of like the means between two extremes. So what he means by that is this. If we want to be courageous, which would be a virtue. Then we have to stay in the middle of being cowardly. Cowards, run from a battle. Or being rash. In other words, just going the other direction and running, sensibly towards, certain danger and death. He says both of those things are extremes, therefore they're both wrong. The virtue of courage is going to be, in what they would say in Latin, immedium stat virtu. Virtue stands in the middle. Therefore we conclude, that courage is the virtue that lies in the middle between two extremes. Okay, that should just give you an overview of these two guys. And enjoy your reading, and look forward to engaging all of you guys and seeing how you discuss things on the forum.